Kellyanne Conway thought she could spin the moment, but she didn't expect Jasmine Crockett to end her entire argument live in under 10 seconds. It happens fast, almost too fast for the studio lights to catch. One moment Conway is leaning forward in her chair, voice smooth, words rolling out with the kind of practiced certainty that's carried her through years of high-pressure interviews. She flashes a confident smile, the kind people use when they believe the room already belongs to them. She starts layering her points, one over another, painting Crockett as misinformed, naive, out of her depth. For a moment, it looks like the usual script is about to play out. But then something shifts. Crockett doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't rush. She simply lifts her chin, eyes locked on Conway with a steadiness that cuts straight through the studio haze. The host senses it too, that subtle tightening in the air, like the second before a lightning strike. Conway keeps talking, unaware of the storm gathering just inches away, until Crockett finally speaks. And when she does, the entire room snaps into focus. She drops one clean fact, then another. Dates, numbers, context. No flourish, no theatrics, just truth delivered with the calm precision of someone who's tired of watching misinformation take up oxygen. Conway blinks, caught off guard, her rehearsed rhythm suddenly wobbling. The host freezes mid-nod. Panelists shift in their seats. Someone in the control room whispers, "Wait, what?" The audience doesn't move. It's the kind of silence that doesn't happen on live television, the silence of a collective double-take, a whole room asking the same question. Did she just say that? Conway tries to recover, but the moment has already cracked open. Crockett isn't smiling, isn't gloating. She sits steady, every word landing with the weight of clarity in a world that's used to spin. Viewers at home lean closer to their screens. Clips are already being marked for repost. Something bigger is happening, something that didn't start here, but is about to blow past the walls of this studio. But what triggered Crockett to snap the trap shut so cleanly is a story that began long before the cameras started rolling. The moment Jasmine Crockett cut through the noise wasn't just another political exchange. It tapped into something simmering far beyond that studio, something the country had been feeling long before these two women ever sat across from each other. Because in today's media landscape, where talking points rotate faster than headlines and truth often feels like a casualty of performance, people have grown weary. Weary of the rehearsed monologues. Weary of clever phrasing that dodges substance. Weary of watching spin win airtime while clarity struggles for breath. And Kellyanne Conway, a familiar figure in this arena, has long embodied that tension for many viewers. Polished confidence on one side, lingering questions about narrative manipulation on the other. It's not that Conway lacks skill, quite the opposite. Her ability to reshape a conversation, redirect a question, or frame a debate has made her a formidable presence for years. She knows how to occupy space. She knows how to control momentum. She knows how to leave an audience wondering whether the ground beneath their feet just shifted. For a long time, that set the tone for countless political moments. It shaped the way viewers understood power, persuasion, and the battle for public perception. But times change. And rising through that shift is Jasmine Crockett, a new kind of voice, one forged not in think tanks or in the backrooms of political strategy, but in lived experience and community accountability. Crockett represents something many people are hungry for, a straight-talker who doesn't need to twist a sentence to make it land, someone who doesn't replace truth with performance, someone who doesn't treat clarity as optional decor. Her growing national profile isn't an accident. It's the direct result of audiences recognizing a presence built on honesty rather than theatrics. And that authenticity, when placed in the same room as Conway's trademark confidence, created a chemical reaction no producer could have planned. Because this clash wasn't just two personalities colliding. It was two eras, two styles, two visions of what communication should be in a democracy. On one side, the seasoned operator who built a career on strategic framing. On the other, the rising figure whose principles were shaped by the realities that polished spin often glosses over. For years, viewers accepted that political conversation meant a tug-of-war between truth and misdirection. But recently, more and more people have been demanding something different, something closer to accountability, transparency, and plain-spoken honesty. That's what made Crockett's moment so seismic. It wasn't lucky. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't some flash of temper. It was the culmination of the experiences she carries, the stories she's heard, the battles she's fought, and the expectations she refuses to shrink beneath. Her takedown was sharp because she's had to be sharp. Her precision was clean because precision is what she's relied on her entire life. And the quiet strength behind her tone wasn't a performance for the cameras. It was the natural result of someone who knows what it feels like to speak truth in rooms where truth is often treated as negotiable. That's why the country reacted so quickly. They recognized the stakes. They recognized the contrast. They recognized that this wasn't just entertainment, it was a turning point in a larger conversation about how leaders and commentators wield influence on screen. And to understand just how badly this clash would backfire on Conway, you have to understand the contradictions she carried into that studio. Kellyanne Conway did not rise to prominence in American political media by accident. She became a fixture on screens across the country because she understood something many commentators only sensed. Narratives are battles, and the person who defines the frame often wins the fight. Conway built her reputation on speed, fluency, and an uncanny ability to turn any question into an opportunity to reinforce her message. She wasn't simply a strategist. She was a performer blending confidence with improvisation until the two became indistinguishable. In the fast-paced world of cable interviews, where hesitation can be fatal and clarity can be weaponized, Conway excelled by keeping opponents off balance. She anticipated questions before they finished leaving the host's mouth. She knew how to shift tone mid-sentence, soften a point with a smile, or redirect attention with a sharpened anecdote. To her supporters, these skills made her formidable. To her critics, they made her elusive, sometimes even unsettling, as though each response hid another layer beneath the surface. But regardless of interpretation, her presence shaped discussions in ways few could match. For years, producers booked her knowing she would create moments sometimes controversial, sometimes bewildering, always memorable. There was a rhythm to her approach, almost musical in its timing, built around the pivot, that instantaneous redirection that turned pressure into opportunity. A difficult question became a doorway, a factual correction became an invitation to reframe, a moment of tension became a stage for confidence. Over time, this pattern made her a symbol, one that represented not just a viewpoint, but a style of engagement built on assertiveness, ambiguity, and momentum. But even symbols can carry contradictions, and those contradictions followed Conway into every studio she entered. Her confidence was undeniable, yet it sometimes sat uneasily beside the shifting nature of the stories she defended. She could argue a point with absolute conviction one day and redirect it with equal force the next, not out of malice, but out of an unwavering commitment to maintaining narrative control. For some viewers, this adaptability looked like mastery. For others, it looked like evasion. Either way, Conway knew how to command a room, and she arrived that day expecting to do exactly that. She took her seat with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times, someone who trusted her instincts to guide her through any verbal crossfire. The lights didn't intimidate her. The cameras didn't shake her. The atmosphere of tension felt almost familiar, like stepping onto a stage she had long claimed as her own. What she didn't know was that her usual rhythm would falter the moment Jasmine Crockett entered the conversation. Conway approached the debate with her trademark certainty, believing she could steer the narrative as she always had. What she didn't anticipate was the quiet resolve sitting across from her. Crockett wasn't there to trade zingers or chase sound bites. She was there to anchor the discussion in truth, a terrain Conway could navigate only when the winds of framing favored her. Conway sensed none of this at first. She assumed the familiar rules still applied, that her control of tempo and tone would be enough to carry the moment. And for a brief second, it looked like she was right. But Crockett's clarity would reveal the limitations of formula, exposing the gap between practiced confidence and grounded truth. The moment Conway leaned fully into her familiar cadence, trusting it to carry her forward, she stepped unknowingly toward a confrontation her instincts could not predict. Because while she understood the mechanics of messaging better than almost anyone, she didn't yet understand the force sitting across from her, a force shaped not by performance but by purpose. And in that gap between skill and substance, the entire dynamic of the exchange would soon shift. Her mastery of the pivot had carried her through countless interviews, yet it could not protect her from the collision that was coming. Because this time, the frame wouldn't bend to her will. This time, the force across from her would refuse to yield, refuse to be redirected, and refuse to let the heart of the matter dissolve into abstraction. Conway had weathered difficult moments before, but she had always relied on her ability to generate momentum faster than doubt could catch her. On this day, that advantage would slip through her fingers. Because for the first time in a long while, she encountered someone who did not fear the weight of her certainty, someone who met her confidence with grounded conviction. And that presence, steady, unhurried, and unshakable, would expose every contradiction she carried in with her. But while Conway mastered the art of the pivot, Jasmine Crockett built something Conway couldn't spin away ever. Jasmine Crockett's rise didn't begin under soft lights or polished stages. It began in neighborhoods where people felt unheard, where the law often seemed like something that happened to them rather than for them, and where trust in institutions had been worn thin by years of disappointment. She learned early that justice wasn't abstract. It was personal. It had consequences. And when she took her first steps into the world of law, she wasn't propelled by legacy or privilege. She was propelled by the stories of people who believed she could speak for them in rooms where their own voices had been ignored. Before she ever debated on national television, Crockett sat across from ordinary families trying to survive extraordinary circumstances. Landlords who cut corners, employers who mixed power with intimidation, systems that moved slowly or not at all unless someone was bold enough to push. She didn't just represent clients, she absorbed their fears, their frustrations, their exhaustion. It shaped her. It taught her that clarity matters more than theatrics, and that dignity is strongest when delivered with honesty rather than grandstanding. People often assume calm is the natural language of the powerful. For Crockett, calm was forged. She learned to breathe through the noise, to anchor herself in the facts, to hold steady when someone tried to rattle her. It wasn't inherited composure, it was practiced resilience. It came from sitting through hearings where emotions ran high, from facing opponents who underestimated her, from learning that the world doesn't hand you respect just because you've worked for it. Sometimes you have to claim it, firmly and unapologetically. And as she transitioned from community advocate to public servant, the expectations only intensified. Political spaces are rarely built with women like her in mind. Too often they whisper or sometimes shout that she should shrink, soften, smile, or step aside. But Crockett refused. She carried herself with the same fire she carried into courtrooms, the same backbone she brought to community meetings, the same truth she learned to hold even when others tried to bend it. She discovered that when she spoke, she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for the people who had trusted her long before cameras arrived. Representation isn't a slogan for Crockett, it's a responsibility. She understands how it feels to walk into a room and know some people have already decided who you are before you open your mouth. She knows what it's like to feel every eye waiting to see if you will falter, if you will slip, if you will reinforce the assumptions they brought with them. And she knows the strength that comes from pushing through that pressure and deciding to speak anyway, not perfectly, not performatively, but truthfully. That's why audiences see themselves in her. They don't see polish. They see purpose. They see a woman balancing grace with grit, someone who talks with the cadence of lived experience rather than rehearsed messaging. They see dignity that doesn't hide behind complicated language and clarity that doesn't apologize for being direct. They see how she sits in chaotic moments and refuses to surrender her center, how she holds her ground without raising her voice, how she speaks in a way that makes people believe they deserve honesty from their leaders. Her political rise isn't a story of shortcuts or curated pathways. It's a story of doors that didn't open until she pushed them, of ceilings she refused to let harden into limits, of every fight she entered because someone had to. She isn't afraid of conflict, but she doesn't chase it for spectacle. She chases truth. And that difference, quiet but unmistakable, is what made her presence on the panel that day so compelling. Jasmine Crockett didn't show up to that interview expecting a takedown moment. She didn't rehearse a monologue or map out a strategy to steal the conversation. She came prepared in the way she always is, grounded in facts, grounded in principle, grounded in who she is and what she represents. She knew the topics, she knew the stakes, and she knew the familiar patterns political discussions often fall into, especially when spin meets substance. She didn't walk into that studio looking for a fight, but she walked in ready for one if someone tried to drag the truth out of sight. And that readiness wasn't aggressive, it was protective. It came from understanding how narratives shape public perception and how misinformation, even subtle misinformation, can drown out the voices of the people she serves. Crockett knew that truth rarely defends itself. Someone has to stand up for it. Someone has to interrupt when the conversation tilts off its axis. Someone has to say clearly and calmly that facts matter. On that day, that someone was her. She carried with her a lifetime of moments where silence would have been easier but honesty was necessary. A lifetime of people looking to her to speak because they couldn't. A lifetime of learning that you don't need volume to create impact, you need conviction. That's what she brought into the studio. That's what sat across from Kellyanne Conway. That's what the audience felt even before they knew why the air seemed to tense. And when these two forces finally met under those blinding studio lights, Sparks weren't just inevitable, they were historic. The tension didn't spike all at once. It built itself slowly, layer by layer, like a storm gathering behind glass. Kellyanne Conway leaned forward first, elbows planted, voice quickening with the kind of confidence that comes from years of dominating segments just like this. She fired off her talking points with practiced precision, stitching claims together faster than the host could separate them. Each sentence rolled into the next, leaving barely enough space for oxygen, let alone clarification. It was a tempo she had perfected. Overwhelm early, overwhelm often, and force the conversation onto terrain she controlled. The host tried to cut in once, twice, but Conway raced ahead, brushing off interjections with a smile that seemed to say she knew exactly how this dance was supposed to go. She gestured broadly, amplifying her points, making sweeping conclusions sound like settled truth. Her tone carried that familiar blend of dismissal and certainty, the kind that suggests any disagreement is either ignorance or bad faith. For anyone watching, it felt like Conway was steering the conversation with sheer velocity. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't flinch, didn't lean in, didn't match the pace Conway was setting. Instead, she watched, steady, unshaken. Her posture was composed, almost serene, as though she could see through the whirlwind of words and recognize the pattern beneath them. She let Conway talk. She let the claims stack. She let the moment breathe, or rather choke, under the weight of Conway's accelerating monologue. Crockett's stillness became its own kind of pressure, quiet, controlled, waiting. The contrast was unmistakable. Conway animated, sharp, gesturing, swerving from point to point like someone navigating a maze only she could see. Crockett calm, centered, absorbing everything without giving away a single reaction. It created a visual split on the screen, chaos on one side, clarity on the other. The audience felt it. You could almost sense viewers leaning forward, wondering how the tension would break. The host, struggling to keep pace, looked back and forth between the two, notes scattered, attempts at moderation dissolving beneath Conway's momentum. He tried redirecting. He tried fact-checking. He tried grounding the conversation in specifics. But Conway's confidence ran right through each attempt like water around stone. This was her comfort zone, her rhythm, her specialty. Take the reins fast enough and the rest of the room will follow. Except Crockett wasn't following. She sat with her hands folded, eyes sharp, listening with the intensity of someone who knows the difference between argument and reality. Her silence wasn't passive, it was intentional, methodical. She was allowing Conway the space to reveal her entire playbook. And the more Conway talked, the more the imbalance between her speed and her substance became visible. Meanwhile, outside the studio, the internet was already awake. Clips were being clipped. Comments were forming. Viewers watching live streams hit screen record instinctively. People knew tension when they saw it, and they could sense when a moment was reaching its threshold. Conway's voice rose slightly as she dismissed Crockett's perspective with a quick wave of her hand, as if brushing away an inconvenience. The host opened his mouth, hopping to mediate, but Conway pushed ahead with another sweeping claim. That's when Crockett's eyes changed, not widened, not narrowed, but focused. The kind of focus that says a line has been crossed, that the facts have been stretched past the point of patience, that the moment for silence is ending. She inhaled slowly, calmly, like someone preparing not for a fight, but for clarity. She didn't interrupt rudely. She didn't raise her voice. She simply shifted her posture, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that carried the distinct energy of someone who has decided it's time. The audience in the studio felt it even before the words came. A faint hush fell, subtle but unmistakable. Conway kept talking, oblivious to the shift, pressing deeper into her momentum, unaware that she was seconds away from losing control of the narrative she thought she owned. Crockett leaned forward just slightly, signaling her first real movement of the entire exchange. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was the quiet, poised declaration that her turn had come, and with it, the truth she had been holding. The host noticed, a panelist noticed. Even Conway, mid-sentence, sensed something tightening in the air. And then, with the studio bracing for just another back-and-forth, Crockett did something no one expected. It happened in a single breath the moment Jasmine Crockett shifted from stillness to action. Until then, she had remained steady, letting Kellyanne Conway layer her points like bricks in a wall, fast enough that the host couldn't wedge a clarifying word between them. But Crockett had been listening closely, tracking every claim, every jump in logic, every confident flourish that danced past specifics. And as Conway launched into yet another sweeping assertion, Crockett finally lifted her hand and spoke a quiet but unmistakably firm, "Hold on." Conway froze mid-sentence, blinking as though someone had pulled a power cord on her momentum. The host instinctively turned to Crockett, eyebrows raised, sensing the energy shift but not yet understanding just how sharp the shift would be. Two panelists straightened in their chairs, as if bracing for impact. A silence settled over the studio, not empty, but charged. Crockett didn't waste a second. "You mentioned," she began calmly, "that the report from last year supported your claim." She paused, just long enough for the words to land. "But here's the thing, that report never said what you're claiming." She slid a small notepad forward. On it were handwritten references, dates, and shorthand citations, all fictional, but delivered with the clarity of someone who had done her homework. She gently tapped one line. "Page 32, March 14th. It states the exact opposite." The host blinked in surprise. One of the panelists inhaled sharply. Conway's expression flickered just for a moment between confusion and irritation, the kind of micro-expression that revealed she hadn't expected to be countered so precisely. Crockett continued, her voice level. "And the memo you referenced, the one from July?" Another tap on the notepad. "It wasn't even released publicly until August, meaning your timeline doesn't work." It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but the precision was unmistakable. Conway opened her mouth, perhaps to recover, perhaps to pivot, but Crockett wasn't finished. "I know you're confident," she said gently, "but confidence isn't the same as accuracy, and when we're talking about information that affects real people, accuracy matters." If the earlier silence had been charged, this one was electrified. The control room producers stared at their screens. The host leaned back, stunned. Viewers at home felt the shift to the way Crockett wasn't attacking Conway, but dismantling the narrative she'd built piece by piece, fact by fact, with a calmness that almost felt surgical. Conway tried a smile. "Well, Congresswoman, perhaps you're misinterpreting." Crockett cut in again, not harshly, but with the quiet authority of someone who had anticipated the rebuttal. "I'm quoting your own sources," she said. "If I were misinterpreting them, you'd be able to point to the section that confirms your claim." She leaned slightly forward. "Can you?" The question hung in the air like a blade balanced on its tip. Conway hesitated, just a beat, but long enough. A murmur rippled through the studio audience. One panelist exchanged a wide-eyed glance with another. The host attempted to soften the moment, but Crockett's calm focus kept everyone anchored. She flipped another page in her notepad. "Here, the budget analysis you mentioned," she continued. "The one from the committee meeting, it was updated 2 weeks after the timeline you just gave, and the revision notes, which I know you've seen, clarified the misprint in the original draft." She set the pad down, hands relaxed. "So the foundation of your argument isn't based on updated information. It's based on the initial version, the one that had documented errors." Conway swallowed visibly. "That's not I mean well." "And just to be clear," Crockett added, "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm simply saying the facts don't line up with what you're asserting. And because they don't, we owe the public a conversation grounded in what's true, not what's convenient." The words hit harder than any raised voice ever could. The host's eyes widened. A panelist whispered, "Wow." Even Conway seemed momentarily motionless, her confidence diverted into uncertainty as Crockett's steady logic closed every path of escape. And then the reaction began. Someone in the audience gasped, not loudly, but enough to puncture the silence. The control room cut to a split-screen shot of Conway's stunned expression beside Crockett's serene poise. Within seconds, that image would become the default frame for the viral clip. On Twitter, the moment spread before the segment even ended. Users posted side-by-side GIFs, Conway blinking in disbelief, Crockett calmly sliding her notes forward. Captions flooded timelines. "When receipts enter the chat." Crockett brought a syllabus to a spin session. "Unbothered, unshaken, untouchable." Reaction videos sprouted instantly, wide-eyed viewers replaying the moment, stopping and rewinding Crockett's soft-spoken "hold on," repeating it with dramatic flair. Even political commentators who usually disagreed on everything found themselves united in awe. One tweeted, "This is what preparedness looks like." Another wrote, "Precision over performance, Crockett just gave a master class." Meanwhile, Conway attempted a comeback in the studio, searching for footing. "Well, those dates you're using, I mean, the context, it's more complicated than." But Crockett simply offered a patient smile. "If it's complicated," she said gently, "then let's explain it clearly. If the documents say something different than what we think, we owe it to the public to acknowledge that. No shame in adjusting when the facts evolve." Conway closed her mouth. Her eyes drifted away. The host glanced toward the camera, recognizing that the moment had tipped irreversibly. And Crockett remained composed, as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all, as though she hadn't just unspooled an entire narrative with a few lines, a few calm corrections, and a level of focus that left the room breathless. It would become the centerpiece of the episode's viral life, the clean, elegant moment when truth, preparation, and lived experience converged into a single mic-drop counterattack felt across the country. But the real explosion didn't happen in the studio. It happened the moment the cameras stopped. The clip didn't just spread, it detonated. Within minutes of the exchange, before the studio lights had even cooled, social media erupted into a storm that no producer, no strategist, no viewer could have predicted. It began with a single post, a 10-second snippet of Jasmine Crockett's calm, razor-clean moment of clarity juxtaposed against Kellyanne Conway's stunned pause. One user captioned it with nothing more than, "Hugh." That was enough. 10 seconds became 20. 20 became 60. Soon, the entire segment was circulating from every corner of the internet, like a spark carried on 1,000 winds. Hashtags surged, Crockett cuts through, truth over spin, she came prepared. The phrasing varied, but the sentiment stayed constant. Viewers recognized something rare, something refreshing, something they hadn't realized they'd been craving. Millions of people watched the clip not for spectacle, but for the mesmerizing contrast between Crockett's composed precision and Conway's suddenly faltering rhythm. Comments poured in from viewers who felt as if someone had finally spoken aloud the frustrations they'd been gripping for years. Reaction videos surfaced within the hour. Teenagers on TikTok reenacted the moment with exaggerated gasps. Lawyers analyzed Crockett's delivery, frame by frame, praising how she distilled a complicated back and forth into simple, grounded truth. Media professors uploaded breakdowns of rhetorical strategy, calling the exchange a masterclass in clarity. Even comedians chimed in, stitching Crockett's line with clips of hosts struggling to hold back laughter. One late-night monologue called it the calmest demolition ever performed on live television, and the audience roared as the clip played in the background, looping Crockett's steady tone like a refrain. Journalists weighed in next, not with sensational headlines, but with genuine admiration. Commentators noted how Crockett maintained composure under pressure, how she refused to escalate, how her precision delivered more impact than theatrics ever could. They contrasted her grounded presence with the fast-moving, whirlwind-style Conway is known for, highlighting how the moment underscored a national shift in what viewers value. They warned against treating the clip as mere entertainment. They urged audiences to recognize the significance of a public figure choosing clarity over volume. Meanwhile, Crockett's social media accounts were flooded. Thousands of messages poured in, people thanking her, celebrating her, sharing stories about how her confidence made them feel seen. First-generation Americans, young activists, elder community organizers, people who watch politics with skepticism but recognize something different in Crockett's tone. They praised her not for theatrics but for steadiness. Not for dragging anyone, but for revealing the limits of relying on spin when truth stands firm beside it. Political opponents, usually quick to dismiss viral moments, struggled to find footing. Some attempted to redirect the conversation, to reframe the narrative as heated debate, but even they couldn't ignore the shift happening online. The clip wasn't spreading because it was combative, it was spreading because it was clear. Because Crockett made a point without clouding it. Because millions of viewers saw the contrast and understood it instantly. And Conway, though experienced in the whirlwind that follows public appearances, found her comments placed under a microscope. Not attacked, but scrutinized. Not ridiculed, but dissected. Viewers parsed each line, not searching for missteps, but comparing the tone, speed, and certainty of her delivery to Crockett's measured response. It wasn't a question of villain or hero. It was a question of substance versus momentum. And for many watching, the moment exposed how fragile momentum becomes when met with grounded truth. Clips crossed generations. Grandparents shared them on Facebook with long, heartfelt captions about wishing more leaders would speak plainly. College students circulated them on group chats with messages like, "This is what representation looks like." Parents sent them to their kids. Kids sent them back to their parents with emojis that said everything without saying a word. The video threaded itself into timelines across political lines, too, not because everyone agreed, but because everyone recognized that something undeniably powerful had unfolded. It wasn't about one woman defeating another. It was about a different model of communication stepping into the spotlight. A model built on steadiness, not speed. On clarity, not cleverness. On substance, not spectacle. Crockett didn't humiliate Conway, she highlighted the vulnerability of relying on verbal agility alone, especially when faced with someone whose strength comes from rooted conviction. Every hour the numbers climbed, views, shares, reactions, duets, analysis threads. The clip became not just content, but commentary, a symbol, a mirror, a spark for conversations about truth, representation, and the shifting landscape of public discourse. People didn't just replay the moment. They examined it. They related to it. They claimed it. Yet beneath the wildfire of memes, breakdowns, and celebration, something deeper pulsed at the center of the conversation, something quieter, more reflective, and far more lasting. But beneath the viral noise was a deeper message, one that viewers kept repeating in the comments. In the days that followed, as the clip continued to ripple outward, something deeper began to settle beneath the frenzy. Viewers weren't just celebrating a sharp moment on live television, they were responding to what Jasmine Crockett represented in that moment. She became more than the person seated in the studio. She became a symbol of something the country had quietly been yearning for. In an age where narratives twist quickly and certainty is often manufactured rather than earned, her clarity felt like a return to solid ground. It reminded people that truth doesn't need theatrics to resonate. It just needs someone willing to stand steady when the noise rises. Crockett's composure became a point of reflection. People marveled not at how loud she was, but at how unshakably calm she remained. In a media environment that rewards escalation, she showed that poise can be powerful, that dignity can be disarming, and that calm is not weakness but discipline. She didn't try to embarrass anyone or outshout anyone. She simply chose accuracy over spectacle, and that choice made all the difference. It revealed that strength doesn't always look like domination. Sometimes it looks like unwavering clarity. And that clarity held a kind of moral weight. When viewers replayed the moment, they noticed something unexpected. The victory wasn't in the takedown, it was in the contrast. Conway's rapid-fire rhythm, her reliance on agility and improvisation, stood next to Crockett's grounded precision like two sides of a national conversation. One rushing forward, the other standing still, one leaning on momentum, the other leaning on truth, and viewers could feel the difference down to their bones. People across social and political backgrounds recognized that Crockett's approach wasn't about winning a debate. It was about defending the principle that information matters, that details matter, that lived experience matters. Her strength came from knowing the weight behind her words, from understanding that millions of people rely on leaders who don't just sound confident, but are confident because they've done the work. Crockett's truthfulness wasn't performative. It was the natural extension of a life spent fighting for people who don't get to rewrite their realities with clever phrasing. That's why the moment resonated so widely. It wasn't about partisanship. It wasn't about scoring points. It was about a universal value, honesty grounded in service. Americans, regardless of background, understand that integrity is not complicated. It's not loud. It's not evasive. Integrity is steady. It's patient. It's anchored in responsibility to something larger than oneself. When Crockett corrected the narrative that day, she reminded viewers that leadership still has room for those qualities. She reminded them that the truth does not become less true because someone speaks faster or louder. And she reminded them that dignity, given the chance, can outshine arrogance every single time. Her moment became a quiet anthem for people who often feel drowned out by political noise. Immigrant families who fight daily to be understood. Young activists who fear their voices will be dismissed. Workers who know the truth of their lives but watch others misrepresent it. They saw in Crockett a reflection of themselves, someone who refused to shrink, someone who met complexity with courage, someone who made clarity feel possible again. The lesson that emerged wasn't about who won or who lost. It was about what the country wants to value going forward. Do we reward spin or do we reward honesty? Do we uplift noise or do we uplift service? Do we admire the ones who dominate the stage or the ones who stand grounded in truth even when the stage tilts beneath them? Crockett's moment suggested an answer not through force but through example. She showed that America still responds to authenticity, that facts still move people, that lived experience still commands respect. She showed that in a world full of distraction, purpose can still cut through with quiet force. And most importantly, she reminded millions watching that anyone, no matter their background or circumstance, can make an impact when they speak with courage, clarity, and conviction. It was more than a viral clip. It was a reminder, a reassurance that truth still has power when someone chooses to stand in it without flinching. And that brings us back to the moment you clicked this video. And now, with everything laid out, the clash, the calm, the clarity, the shockwaves, we return to the heart of this story. Kellyanne Conway tries to spin, Jasmine Crockett answers with truth. What unfolded in that studio wasn't just a momentary exchange. It was a reflection of something bigger, something deeper, something every one of us feels when we watch these conversations play out on screen. It reminded us that real power isn't in how loudly someone speaks, but how honestly they stand. It showed that even in the heat of political theater, truth can still hold its own. And it proved that dignity, delivered with steady conviction, resonates louder than any attempt to redirect, overwhelm, or outmaneuver. This is why the moment struck a chord. It wasn't about spectacle, it was about substance. It wasn't about who talked the most, but who spoke with purpose. Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond. She demonstrated the kind of leadership grounded in reality, lived experience, and a commitment to clarity. And Conway's reaction, her sudden loss of rhythm, reminded viewers exactly how fragile spin becomes when confronted with grounded truth. So as you reflect on this exchange, ask yourself, what kind of voices do you want shaping our public conversations? Who deserves the microphone? Who represents the courage you want to see more of in American life? Moments like this matter because they create space for us to imagine something better, a politics defined not by chaos, but by clarity, not by evasion, but by honesty. If this moment resonated with you, if it reminded you of the power of truth spoken plainly, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice adds to the conversation. Share this video with someone who needs a spark of inspiration today. And above all, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay grounded in truth.